being in war is dangerous. I mean, that seems obvious. Those on the front lines, much greater danger. And we talked about train as you're going to fight, but even if you do it right, you can still have things go wrong because the opposing forces have a say in all this stuff too. So a lot of it is luck. And, you know, in combat, people believe in luck, superstitions. Many of them find religion because they need something. Well, my dad, I don't know, was particularly superstitious. However, when he was learning to fly, they would play poker at night. And one night they were playing poker, and he won the hand. And in that hand, in the pot, was a silver dollar with the year 1923 on it. And that became his lucky dollar. It was the year he was born. And he kept that silver dollar and never flew a plane himself unless this was in his pocket. His entire life, throughout the war, after the war, we talked about when he'd pick us up in the 180. That was his lucky dollar. And we talk about the dangers, and it's one of the reasons he didn't want to join the American Legion. People talked about the fun and those kind of things. Well, all life, you're going to have tragedy, you're going to have stress, and you're going to have some fun. He had little fun too. The 4th Armored Division had the most continuous days in combat. Well, when they did get a break, on one of the breaks, he had an opportunity to fly to Paris. Fly his own plane. He flew to Paris. And while he was there, he thought it'd be fun to fly under the Eiffel Tower. So he did.
The next day, right?
Oh, no. The next day, he was walking around Paris, and he noticed an MP at the Eiffel Tower. And he walked up to him and just talking and said, well, what are you doing here? He said, some son of a gun flew under this tower yesterday and caused a lot of problems, and by God, I'm going to catch him.
I'm here. He said to me, I'm here to get his tail numbers if he comes back. And Dad said, well, good luck, Sergeant.
Yeah. Good luck.
Because they had been debating, I think, the night before, the pilots, is there room to fly under that thing? Yeah. And they were going, oh, yeah, this is the wingspan and everything. Yeah. So. And he described taking up right like pre-dawn, flying really low, and flying under and going back to prove he could do it. Yeah.
He also, because with 4th Armored Division, he flew General Patton on occasion, and he flew then Colonel Creighton Abrams on a couple of occasions. They used it to find out what was going on in the battlefield or to find certain things and get things done. The story about when he flew Patton was Dad flew out, or had Patton picked up, and he was showing him the front lines, showing where things were, and Patton tapped him and said, I want to go out there, pointing to the front. And my dad said, General, I've been out there, and if we go out there, we're going to get shot at, and I don't want to be the pilot known as the one flying when Patton was killed.
Those weren't the words that Dad described me.
Well, go right ahead.
Yeah, it was like, and he said there was no warning that all of a sudden a Jeep came up with 2 stars on it. At that point, he was 2-star, 3-star.
Oh, he was 3.
3-star, yeah, okay. And it was just, walked up and said, take me up, Lieutenant, and, that was described, and he, take me there. And I remember he's repeated this many times to me, so, and he said, General, if we go over there, we're going to get our asses shot off. I've been there. And he said there was this long pause. He says, okay, Lieutenant, take me back then. So it's like, he thought he might get in trouble for saying that to General Patton. But I think that's one thing that Dad stressed to me.
Yeah.
Is that if you did your job well, you were respected by everyone at every level. But And that's, I think, another life lesson.
Yeah.
He said, I don't care if you're a ditch digger. You just be the best damn ditch digger you can be. And he did give that respect to everyone who did their best at whatever they did. That was just a part of him. But yeah, he was worried that he might get in trouble for saying that to General Patton.
And you're right. I'm sure that's what happened. He told me that he didn't want to go down in history as one flying the plane, but that was a thought afterwards. I don't think you sent that to Patton. Yeah,
probably not. No.
Yeah, no. But that's it. And it wasn't that Patton was afraid. It was, hey, here's somebody that knows what he's doing, and the risk isn't worth it.
He's been there.
Yeah, well,
he's telling me we shouldn't go there. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in life. The risk.
Yeah.
Start with anywhere in combat is dangerous, even behind what you'd consider the rear lines. But why don't you tell the 180-day story?
Yeah. The other story I heard multiple times was that he would fly, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, 3 or 4 missions a day, because they only had, L4 only had a 10-gallon tank, so they'd go up for a couple hours, come back. And one day his mechanic, he landed, and he had his own personal mechanic. Every pilot did. And mechanic came up to him and says, well, that's 180. And Dad says, well, 180 what? He goes, that's 180 days in a row you've come back with at least one new bullet hole in your plane. Because it was his job to repair them. So that's the kind of, the odds that he lived were astounding. So I've heard at Oshkosh and other places a couple people say that being a liaison pilot was one of the safest jobs in the war because they knew that they were going to call in artillery, so the enemy just hid from you, and that just was not true. It was an incredibly dangerous job.
One of the things that affected him for probably the rest of his life is he had this, really came out far to protect your eyes from the sun so that you could see things. He had a bullet go through that bill.
From below.
From below.
It came out between his legs
and went through the bill. That was his lucky hat. He wore that for a long time till he was captured. He had landed, and the Russians had moved in, so this is obviously very near the end of the war. And the Russians didn't speak English, he didn't speak Russian, and they captured him, didn't know if he was a German wearing an American uniform and all that stuff, and held him. I don't recall how long, I think it was a couple days, but it wasn't real long. But they didn't return his hat. No.
Or his flying gloves, I believe.
Yeah.
He had deerskin flying gloves that he always wore, and they were gone. He figured he better not hang around there and make a big deal of it. He wanted to get out of there.
Right. Yeah, especially with the language barrier and, a lot of tension, and especially, all the time, but near the end of the war, the Germans were putting people in Soviet uniforms, Russian uniforms, and American uniforms and trying to infiltrate. You didn't know who was who. It was a dangerous job. And one of the things that was clear to me was my dad did not expect to survive the war. He knew that he had a duty as much to the people around him and his unit as it was to the country. And this was his job, and he had to do it to the best of his ability so that they could end the war and do things. Very near the end of the war, he saw one of the concentration camps. It was Ohrdruf, and he landed his plane near there. Now, there's no record of this because I've looked, but my dad is certain, and I believe he was the first American into Ohrdruf. And Ohrdruf, he landed, walked in, and saw these piles and piles of bodies, saw emaciated people, saw one German soldier laying on the ground, not shot or anything, and these prisoners trying to beat him, but they just didn't have the strength. They were hitting him, but with nothing. What he saw in Ohrdruf had a profound impact on him. When he got out of the Army, and he was asked to stay, but he'd wanted to go to medical school. He went to medical school. He later went into psychiatry, and then later moved to Houston, and one of his patients was a Holocaust survivor. And Dad helped him. And he became known in the survivor community as somebody who understood and had been there and at least had seen it. And you probably know more about that.
I really don't. I mean, that was a time when he was in Texas and didn't have a lot of contact with him during those days. But he's very, very involved in.
Oh, yes.
In that, the Holocaust Museum and being involved in that community and treating.
Yeah, that's right. The Holocaust Museum in Houston, he was involved in. When I was in Texas in the Army, I was a brigade commander, military police brigade, and we had a Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I invited a Holocaust survivor to come and speak. And I invited my dad too. I wanted them both to speak, one as a survivor and one who had, witnessed. For a number of reasons. One of them was, he was my dad, he knew about it, and I wanted him to hear and participate. Another is, and they're still going around today, the Holocaust deniers. It didn't happen. So here's somebody who claims to be a survivor and somebody who claims to have been there and seen it. Well, when the survivor got up and talked, I mean, it was riveting on what he was saying, how he said it, what he had to do to survive, how people survived. And his message was, this wasn't the Germans, this wasn't even the Nazis. These were individual people that were doing things, and you can't hate a population or a group based on what individuals did, regardless of how big the group of individuals were. And I could talk for a while about things he said. I mean, it was just horrible stuff. Horrible things like, in order to save bullets, when they decided to execute a woman and her baby, they put the baby's head over the woman's heart, so it only took one bullet to kill them both. How if you got injured, you obviously couldn't work, so they just take you out and kill you. So you either didn't let the injury bother you, or you did things like get a needle and sew yourself up, because otherwise you're just going to be killed. Anyway, he went on. It really affected my dad. My dad was a very good public speaker, did a lot of teaching. But it was clear when he got up after this guy, he was very emotional. He had been touched by this, and he had trouble and was choking up in finding the right things to say and the right way to say them. And as I said, he'd spent time helping Holocaust survivors. So this type of war, and this is for everybody, but specifically how it applied to my dad, a very dangerous position. He was fortunate to survive, a lot of skill, but a lot of luck, because luck can work both ways. And he saw some things that we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. They called it, shell shock or battle fatigue or other terms. And I didn't believe, my dad was my dad. It was him. It was normal. Mm-hmm. I did not know. It wasn't until years later that I realized he was suffering some post-traumatic stress for these things for his whole life, and how he did things. And so part of the Greatest Generation. And if you haven't read the book, you need to, because it's phenomenal on how it affected the individuals, their parents, and their children after the war. And Len Kiley was in the same situation. Len had some real difficulties with his kids that he later on believed it was because of his own issues and how he raised them and how strict he was on some things, and not much tolerance of their growth, because in combat you couldn't wait for growth. You had to be able to do things now. So he had my mother actually told me that, I mean, basically throughout his life he had a recurring nightmare seeing the bullet come through and going through the bill,
and he would wake up screaming in a cold sweat.
So another thing on this is when the movie Star Wars came out, I went and saw it and thought, this is a cool movie. In fact, I took probably a dozen people to go see it. This was such a great movie. And I took my dad to it. He had no great desire to see a science fiction movie, but I told him it was great, so we went. He visibly shook when the spaceship went towards the Death Star and they were shooting at him, and then turned and maneuvered down into the valley. He had a really rough reaction. I couldn't see if he had closed his eyes, but that really, really bothered him. And we're talking, well, when did that come out?
77.
Okay.
75.
So that's that's 30 years later.
Yeah, he told me he couldn't even stay in the theater, that he tried several times to see the movie, and he just couldn't stay through the whole thing. I didn't know if that jives with your memory.
Well, he did get up and walk out, but I thought he was getting popcorn or something. Okay. I didn't know why, but he did. And so another thing, in order for people to leave the European theater after the war was officially over.
To finish that.
Please.
He discovered, and what he told me is he never understood why he couldn't see that until there was a show on TV, making of Star Wars. And the way they made the TIE fighters and all that, those battles real, is they took World War II aerial combat footage and used computers to overlay the spaceships on them. And so when he saw these things, his instinct was it triggered his experience, and then he understood.
And then he didn't have a stick or anything. I mean, it was shooting, but he had no control now.
He had no control over it. Yeah. So that's why it triggered him like that. Yeah. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So at the end of the Second World War, and people were going to start to go home, there was a system, a point system. And you had so many points for how long you'd been in the military. He joined early, before December 7th. You had so many points for being married. You had so many points for children. He wasn't married, had no children. You had so many points for time in combat. And you had so many points for medals that you received. My dad, for the 4th Armored Division, was the high point officer. And he received a whole bunch of air medals for things that he had done and for time.
I thought he also got points for combat mission, number of combat missions.
Well, that's what the air medals were for.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, air medals are for combat missions.
I see.
So.
Okay, gotcha.
So it was time in combat.
I see.
In his case. So he was the high point officer. They had a farewell party for those that were leaving first, and my dad attended it, and I can't find the photograph, but I know my grandfather. I want to find it. In that photograph is Creighton Abrams, then a full colonel, who later became the chief staff of the Army, had asked my dad to stay in the Army, that he thought he'd love it and he'd be a good officer, and he had to make sure he got to Command General Staff College, which was the next big step to promotion. And my dad told him no, that his lifelong goal had been to become a doctor, and he wanted to go do that. If he couldn't do it, He thought he'd come back in the Army or thought about it, but so he went on to medical school and kept in touch with Creighton Abrams. They exchanged Christmas cards. That was about it. That was touch. Fast forward to 1973. I'm an officer, a second lieutenant at Fort Myer, Virginia. We have this big party going on at the officers club, and I'm in charge of parking. So everything's going fine, and I'm standing by the front door, and two people walk out. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who was a Navy admiral at the time, and Creighton Abrams. And they looked at me and said, "Good evening, Lieutenant." I said, "Good evening, sirs." And I really wanted to say something to Abrams at the time, like, "You knew my father," but I didn't, out of sense of proper protocol and all that stuff. And the chairman asked me how long I'd been in the Army, and I told him. And I think at that time it was a matter of 7 months. And he had said something to Abrams like, "We've got more time in the chow line than he has in the Army." And they laughed and walked away. It was fine.
Yeah.
But one of my regrets is I never talked to him on "You knew my father" and that, because it was more than just a passing acquaintance. I mean, they weren't good friends or anything, but they shared the experience. There was one story that Abrams came to my dad and said, "Get in the plane, let's go." And "Where are we going?" He said, "Out that direction," but it was to the rear. And what they were looking for, what Abrams was looking for, was fuel. And he wanted to find part of the fuel convoy, Red Ball Express, and divert it to them. So they found it. They landed, and as my dad said, he watched Abrams forge George Patton's signature on a document and then walk over and get the whole column diverted. And I thought at the time, that's cool, but who'd he take it from? I'm going through all this stuff. But they were the lead element. They were the point, and they were at a point where they were just going to be targets because they couldn't move. And right or wrong, it was what was done. And so he knew Abrams. I'm sorry that I didn't get a chance. I didn't say something to General Abrams while I was there. Unfortunately, when Ann and I married on our honeymoon, we found out that Abrams had died. So another thing that, don't pass up opportunities when you have them. You don't know if they're coming back.
Yeah.
Another thing, and this was common for a lot of people in the Army, in combat. They'll get religion. Many of them start smoking. Many of them start drinking. As I said, my dad never figured that he didn't know he was going to die, but he knew how dangerous it was, and any day this could end for him. And he started to drink in combat. Not while he was flying, and not just before, but after the day's missions he would drink. And certainly got drunk at the time, but got up and flew the next day and survived it. And the only reason I say this is when he left to come back to the States, he had 3 bottles of alcohol. I don't know what type. I don't know if it was wine or whatever with him. And the doctor on board took it from him. Said, "You can't have this aboard the ship. I'll put it in storage until we get the other end." And my dad was very concerned that he was an alcoholic, that he couldn't stop drinking, and used that time going back to see if he was. And he wasn't. And he realized that no, it wasn't a disease that he couldn't control. It was his desire, so he could stop, and he was very grateful for that. But still, he took a long time before he had his first drink after he got back. Combat, stressful situations, they affect people in many different ways. It plays through to the rest of their lives. So that's what I had on the actual war years and the post-combat. Do you have anything? Did we miss anything?
Don't probably. But
Well, then let's look at the list.
yeah. I mean, now, did he tell you the story about flying home to Michigan
Oh, yeah.
after the
That wasn't after the war. That was during.
during the war? But
Yeah.
they were
In one of the breaks where 4th Armored Division was pulled off the lines to get a break. My dad was back at one of the airfields where a bomber was being ferried back to Michigan, Selfridge Field, which was not too far from where his parents were. So he hitched a ride.
Yes. He said, technically speaking, officers can't go AWOL, so he figured he'd just not tell anybody and hop on the plane.
And he hopped on the plane. He was only going to be there for a short time and then go back. But he flew back, walked in on his parents, and told them this was just for a short, but he was able to hop a ride back. So, and, when he told me that, and I laughed and thought about it, and I thought, and that's the kind of stuff that the people in the American Legion that he didn't want to join, he felt that's all they talked about is the fun things they did, not the true horrors of combat, horrors of war. But
glorifying war was not something he was interested in.
He also, since he was going back as one of the first ones, he was a first lieutenant at the time, planes to get to the ships could only hold so many people, so it was a priority. And the guy he was with said, was a major, I think, and he turned to the major and said, or a lieutenant colonel, and said, I've never known a lieutenant colonel that didn't expect to make colonel and already have his eagles. And the guy said, well, yeah. He said, so let's pin him on and get priority on this flight. And he did.
Wow.
Yep. So... Anyway,
the hand-to-hand combat thing. Did you want to talk about that, or?
Sure. One of his other regrets is that, again, near the end of the war, and these planes didn't fly at night. They didn't have lighting. They didn't have the L-4 didn't even have an electrical system. They used batteries to power the radios. So the planes were all down at night, and that's when mechanics would work on them, whatever it needed to get it ready for the flight the next day. The pilot would get up pre-dawn and take off. Well, near the end of the war, at one of those nights, my dad had to get up and go to the bathroom, and there's nothing there. So, as you did in the field, he took what is known as an entrenching tool. It's a small foldable shovel. And he went out in the woods to dig and came across an unknown person. And I don't recall how he knew he was German, whether it was a uniform or he said something. And a quick fight, my dad used the shovel to kill him. It's the only person in combat he knows that the only person that he had killed directly. But this is a guy that wanted to be a doctor and help and save people, and he killed somebody.
Yeah. He told me it differently.
Well, please, go ahead.
Yeah. He told me he had gone, that there was a little bit of woods down there, like a creek or something was running. He decided he'd go to the bathroom there. And when he got down there, he realized that there were German soldiers on the other side. I mean, they had no idea that they were so near Germans. And so he had his knife. He was going to the bathroom, and just suddenly there was this soldier in front of him, and he said he told me he must have got him in the heart because he died instantly. But he saw this young man with a look of surprise on his face that he just killed, and just he didn't. I didn't know about that, and I guess he didn't tell Karen until very close to the end.
Yeah. Well, okay. The stories are compatible except knife or the entrenching tool, and I certainly could be wrong there.
Yeah. But that's how we knew it was German, because he actually had said, "Oh,
yeah.
he could hear them,"
Yeah.
and they were talking in German. So it was like, okay,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
Anyway.
they had great regret over killing somebody, and
yeah. The other time he described to me about vomiting is because he had called in, artillery strike on a wooded area that was full of German troops, and he landed and inspected it, and they had set the charges to go off before they hit the ground, which basically made the trees shrapnel.
Mm-hmm.
And he landed and looked it over and said there was not much left recognizable of the people who were there, and he just was horrified because he had called in the artillery strike. So
yeah.
firsthand, this is what I did.
Yeah, realization of what he was doing and how people were, that's...
Yeah. So that's the only thing that I can think of that you missed, but the story. But I'm sure there are more.
Well, yeah. But that's, you can say it's part of combat, but it also shows to the character. I mean, you'd have to be a sociopath to just turn away from that and say, okay, I'm doing my job and going. It's
right.
Post-traumatic stress. So he did come back to the States. He had finished high school. He went to Highland Park Junior College and got into a program where he could finish junior college, and go to medical school. I mean, it wasn't agreed in the beginning, but he finished the junior college and then signed up for a program where he had been accepted to medical school. Combat veterans had a high priority at the time. So he graduated from high school in Highland Park, Michigan, and then went to Wayne State University and became an MD. During that time, he married my mother. My older brother Bob, myself, and my sister Barb were born. And then he looking for an opportunity. I mean, he had these debts from medical school, and he had an offer, and this was pretty common at the time for small cities to offer to set up a new doctors because they needed a doctor. He accepted a position in Boyne City, Michigan, and moved up there. And I don't know what all the deal was. I mean, he had some debts, but he had an obligation to stay there while some of his debts either were being paid off or they provided the house or the office or something, and I'm not sure, but that was the deal. And although he enjoyed it and loved Boyne City, he wanted to go into psychiatry. But in Boyne City, there was a ski resort there, Boyne Mountain, and to be quite frank, it was very lucrative for him because he was the only doctor, and there was a lot of broken bones every day that came in through him.
Yeah, and he became really good friends with Everett Kircher, who was the owner
of Boyne Mountain,
the originator of Boyne Mountain. So
So, and then during that time, my parents divorced. My mother and the three of us moved downstate to Michigan, or downstate in Michigan, where I was closer to my grandparents, and I was very fortunate. My mother, although hurt and normal disturbance over the divorce, kept us in close touch with my grandparents and my father's brother and sister, my aunt and uncle. So she kept us in the family. My dad remarried. Eric, Brian, and were born there, and then Kate was adopted. And let's see, so that must have been 16, 17 years he was in Boyne City, because in 1967, he moved to Traverse City, where he accepted a residency in psychiatry at the Traverse City State Hospital. And that's what he knew he wanted to do for a long time. He accepted a pretty healthy cut and pay to go accept this residency so he could get into psychiatry.
Yeah.
Another one of those decisions that if I don't do it now, it's not going to happen, or too much life goes by. And that of course, led to, in psychiatry, when the Traverse City State Hospital was getting ready to close, and Brian's mother had passed. My dad stayed in that a little bit. He met somebody else. Met somebody else's.
One was very brief, yeah.
One was very brief. It was very short. His wedding and divorce inside of a week, I think, or something.
Yeah.
Or annulment.
It's definitely.
And then he met Karen, and Karen was a psychologist, and they moved to Houston, where her practice was, and they were married 26 years. Yeah, 25, 26 years until my father passed. And while in Houston, he was the psychiatrist for their organization, needed an MD in order to prescribe medications and such, and they had a group of psychologists there, and that's where he met the Holocaust survivor and became well known within the Holocaust survivor community. And when we talk about the survivors, it's not only the people that survived, but the family members, the ones that they married, that lived with the people and do this, and which was their impact. I mean, I talk with my wife about, and not that I've had anything like this, but the combat experience, the deployments I've had, and the effect on her and the kids while they were growing up, and tried to be very cognizant of what happened with Dad and others, and how it would impact my relationship with Ann, and my relationship with the kids, and how we're going to do things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, while he was, I'm sorry, let me step back a little bit. While he was in college and medical school, he remained with the Michigan National Guard. He was promoted to captain, and when he got out of the Guard, he was a captain. A couple things happened with him there. One is, we talked about the Brody system earlier. That's when he went and flew at Fort Sill as they were doing more testing and demonstrating on how that worked. He also had what I think is a funny situation. He was asked, as part of the Michigan National Guard, that they're doing a retreat ceremony for the governor, G. Menon Williams. And what he was asked to do is, after the parade goes by the governor, the last thing would happen is his plane would fly by the governor with the pilot and then a person in the back saluting the governor. Well, my dad was the pilot for that and said, yeah, I can do that. And he did. And Governor Williams decided that that was a dangerous stunt and ordered him grounded as an unsafe pilot.
I never heard that.
Oh yeah, and he was grounded, and
oh my God.
And what he had to do was, after the governor finally said, well, if some instructor or somebody fly with him and say he's safe, it's okay for him to go flying again. So they said, yeah, they would do that, and they got this instructor, somebody well known in Michigan, and I knew where he was at one time. It was, I think, in the Cadillac region, and who had agreed he would do the test flight because it wasn't going to be the military whitewashing. So my dad showed up, and the guy looked at him and said, "You're Bob Pearson, right?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I've flown with you. You know this plane better than I do. Just need to go for flight." It was a very short. Guy signed him off, and that was it. But Governor Williams grounded him.
That sounds like when he got his driver's license. I don't know if he tell you that.
Oh, I don't know the story.
Yeah, because he had gone off to war, still in high school. He had not gotten his driver's license. So he's flying planes in the war, coming back, and so he's back, and of course, in the first few days, I need to go get my driver's license, right? So, in his uniform, he goes down and just explains, to the person, I don't know if it was Secretary of State or how he did it in those days, that says, I need to apply to get a driver's license. And the guy looked at him and said, "Well, you know how to drive, don't you?" The guy said, "Yeah," and he just gave him his license. Shortest driving exam ever. Because by then he was, how old would he have been at that time?
45. He was born 23, so he was 22, 23
22 years old, had been overseas and
yeah. We talked about Ohrdruf earlier for a second, and my father being the first person there. But what's significant about Ohrdruf historically is when the combat units came up there later that day or the next day, they were so horrified by what they saw that they told senior people, and Patton and Eisenhower went through Ohrdruf, and Eisenhower ordered the mayor and the senior people, the mayor and the people of the town to walk through Ohrdruf and to see what was going on right next to where they lived, because this was all, no, those were the Nazis, we had no part of that. And he ordered them to walk through and paraded them through to see the horrific stuff. The mayor and his wife then committed suicide once they saw what was going on. And the townspeople claim that they didn't know. Well, I don't know if they knew or not, but it was certainly right there in their backyard. So when I hear today about people saying, well, I didn't know, or this, some things we have a responsibility to know and to look into.
Yeah. So. Yeah. He said, you see trainloads of people coming in all the time, but nobody leaving, and smoke coming up, and they knew.
So I was very grateful for my father. He'd been very good to me. He and I were very close. Brian and I are both pilots. I became a pilot earlier on, and my dad and I used to go places. So I was asked, or what values did I pass on to my children based on both my experiences and what I learned from my father, which of course I learned them through my experiences. Well, there's probably too many to enumerate, but the ones that come to mind first and foremost are my older brother and I were big into scouting, and we became Eagle Scouts. And to this day, the Scout Law, the 12 points of Scout Law, are important to us. Both my boys are Eagle Scouts, and I'm very proud to say that my oldest son has 2 boys, and they already know the Scout Law and what the different points mean, and the oldest one there is only 10. I mean, they don't fully comprehend it, but they know the value of trustworthy, loyal, etc. I certainly go through the whole thing. But some of the things that I pass on are, don't miss an opportunity to do good, or don't miss an opportunity to do something, like when I should have said something to General Abrams, but I said something to Len Kiley, and see how that paid off. Another thing is honesty and integrity are what is you. Your integrity is you and your reputation. When you besmirch that, it's for life for those people. You don't have a second chance. Now, we all make mistakes, and people can accept that. But integrity, and my kids know, and they'll say, high integrity is you're going to do the right thing even when nobody's looking, just because it's the right thing to do. But another is treating all people with the same rights, with equality. Everybody's not equal. Some people have physical infirmities, some people have mental infirmities, some people are brilliant. We're not all the same, but we all have the same rights. And you heard some of the stories we told about my dad and how he believed that and passed it on. Well, when I was in the Army, I was an officer, but everywhere we lived, we took the kids through the whole city. This is where we are. These are the people that live in nicer houses than we do. these are the people that can't afford and don't have as much as we have. And it's not of where we fit in a caste system. It's we're all different. You need to work for what you're going to get, and we all don't have the same opportunity, but we all have the same rights. And that's very important to me, and I certainly have passed that on to my children, and I will say they both know it and live it very well. One of the things, humorous, when I was commissioned, I went to Michigan State University, went through the ROTC program, and I was the cadet commander there. One of my advisors, one of the captains, when I was commissioned, or just before I was commissioned, came up to me privately and said, I think you're really going to like the Army, and you should do well, but you have one problem. Okay, what's that? So you treat everybody the same. Doesn't matter what their education level is, what their position is, you treat the colonel and the secretary the same way. And I said, yeah, what's wrong with that? He says, you're going to work with people that won't like that they're going to expect deference. So, well, I give deference to the rank and all that. He said, yeah, but if they're wrong, you're not afraid to tell them you think they're wrong and why. And a lot of senior people don't want to hear that. And yeah, he was right. I ran into that, but you know, I told one of the guys I was working for, he said, well, I forgot what he said, but it amounted to, you know, why are you telling me this? You know, I'm a lieutenant. I said, and I looked at him and said, sir, I'm officer in your command. I'm paid to make this command move forward and make you move forward. And if I think you're not doing something right, I have an obligation to tell you, but I'm going to follow whatever your decision is. And he kind of rolled his eyes, but okay. But yeah, it's treat everybody the same. Everybody has the same rights. Mm-hmm. How about you?
A lot the same. Experience I had, I guess, where I learned that from him was when, you know, at the hospital, at the state hospital, when he was clinical director. They had, you know, he was also in charge of training what were called FMGs, foreign medical graduates, mm-hmm. people from usually the Philippines, Korea, or, you know, that part of the world who, for their experience to become psychiatrists. And he was in charge of training that group of people. We met them often. They'd bring their families over for dinner, or we would go there. And there was always in Traverse City, it was, even today, but especially back then, an extremely white Midwestern community. I mean, there wasn't a lot of exposure to other people. So we were always given the message that, yes, these people are different. They come from a different country with different habits or whatever. That's not a bad thing. We need to understand that they are in a strange land, and we need to, you know, be open to them rather than the other way around. You know, we would, on Christmas, he would usually have a patient, and in those days, people stayed in the hospital for decades. So people with like schizophrenia that he knew, and if they were, obviously he never brought somebody home who was blatantly psychotic, but you know, some men have Christmas dinner with us, and he goes, and it was always it was kind of a guessing game. Afterwards, they were gone. Well, do you think they were a staff person or were they a patient?
No,
and we didn't know. So,
well, but
okay, a really good lesson.
And the point there is, we didn't care. They were a person. It didn't matter. We weren't looking for a station or anything. It was
exactly.
They were a person. Yeah.
And he treated Sue, his secretary there, and I mean, it was something that was ingrained. For sure, you treat everybody well. It didn't matter who it was, and that I think is something I've really ingrained in. I hope I've ingrained in my children, and it is one of the things I'm most proud of. You don't need to earn respect. You naturally have respect as a human being. Everybody is different. You can lose respect through your own behavior, but everybody deserves respect. Their own situation, where they were born, whatever, it varies. And if there is, people here know, I'm the boss, along with my wife. If you really want to piss me off, treat one of our administrative staff badly because you have a master's degree and they don't.
Mm-hmm.
That is not going to play well. And so, that's just,
well, along those...
to me, it's like natural. I just can't imagine thinking about someone different based on...
Because we were raised that way.
Yeah.
That's right.
But I've seen it over and over and over again.
Oh,
I worked at CMH. It was like, just leave the administrative staff. They were so thankful. You treat me just like you treat everybody else. It's like, well, yeah. And he goes, nobody else does that.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm so sorry.
I've had some of the same experiences. 2 points here. When I was in college, probably a junior or senior, and I was back at home with Dad, and there was some picnic with all these doctors, and Dad introduced me, and it was first names. He said, "You're an adult now." And I said something about, yeah, but they're all doctors. He said, "Doctors are just people, just like everybody else. Just because you have a title doesn't make you any different than anybody else."
Yeah.
And he was a doctor. It was like, and one of the things I did, what I discovered on my boys, we moved, Ann and I physically moved 17 times in our 24 years. Our boys went to different schools almost every year. Jeremy was fortunate. He was in a place a couple times where he could go 2 years in a row. But Mike went to first and second grade in the same school, and the next time he did that, he was in 10th grade, 10th and 11th. So every year, a different school, different situation, different somebody. And we moved, we lived in a lot of places in the States and around the world. But we would come back to Virginia, where they had were in first and second grade, a couple times. And when we came back and he was able to graduate from high school, it became obvious to me. I was also a scoutmaster and assistant scoutmaster before that, and knew a lot of these kids. The change, the difference as they're growing up, and positive in many ways, but the kids that lived there their whole life looked at this is life as right or wrong, how you do things. And my kids looked at it as, no, it's not right or wrong, it's different. And there's a lot of differences. We lived in Germany and they do things differently. Okay, it's different. And you learn about it. And my boys, I know, were much more accepting of others and differences than some of the other kids. And I discovered the same thing. I grew up in Redford Township, Michigan. And when I went back to my high school reunion, some of the people had never left. They were nice people and all that stuff, but you hear them talk about things, and it's right and wrong instead of different. And you're absolutely right on respect. And when I was saying we're all equal, that's what I meant, is we all deserve the same amount of respect. So.
And it's interesting because, I'm strictly speaking Dr. Pearson, which sounds weird because that's Dad. Because I have a PhD, not an MD. But here I'm Brian.
But PhD is higher than MD on the educational scale.
It is, but
just thought I'd add
still
that
not
for you.
Still not a real doctor. But I make people don't know me as Dr. Pearson. The only time I pull out my doctor is if I'm talking to a physician on the phone and they're not treating me with respect. And that's when I will say, this is Dr. Pearson, because a lot of doctors don't treat other people well unless they're fellow doctors. But I think it's very important that up and down the line, I'm Brian, you're Mike.
Mm-hmm. So what we're talking about in respect, and when you grow up with it and keep it as an understanding this, I had a situation similar to what you were talking about, because I think I do treat everybody the same. I don't care what their background is. Yeah. So when I was in this, it was in the U.S. Marshals, I was assistant director of one portion, and I was asked to become the assistant director in another portion. I said, why? I don't have any experience in that. It was the Asset Forfeiture Division. The boss wanted me there, so I went there. The person, I don't know how worldwide this is going to be, but the person I was replacing was, in my words, a tyrant. A yeller and a screamer. In fact, I was told very credibly by people that when she wanted to shake things up, she would call the staff in, and those that were employees were all protected, but many of them were contractors. She would ask one a question, that was a loaded question, and then say, "You're fired." And the staff were just scared to death of her and believed that she was firing people just to prove she was the boss. Now I come in, I'm a new guy, I know nothing about asset forfeiture, very little, and so I'm there just doing the things I think I ought to do, and I'm seeing some problems, but I know how to fix those and it's mostly about team building, getting the team to work together and focused on the problem rather than what people think about the problem. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the story ends like this. I was asked to take a new job, one I really wanted. The Attorney General asked me to become the federal detention trustee. I knew I was going to become the federal detention trustee, so the director of the Marshal Service wanted me to go to do something else in the Marshal Service before I was going to go over there. And I said, sure, if that's what you want, I'll do it. And he said, but I don't want you to tell your employees until I can release it. And I said, no. They have a right to hear it from me. I'll tell them they need to keep quiet, tell me what time you want to do it. So I called the group together, and I did this on occasion to make announcements and all that. Mm-hmm. Called them together and said, I'm here just to let you know that I'm moving to a new position. And you heard this audible gasp, and people started crying. And I was astonished, and I heard the same things you're hearing. You treated us the same. You treated us, you let us do our job. You treated us well. You asked what we needed and tried to provide it. And they weren't used to working in a place like that.
Yeah. Wow.
It's pretty neat.
Yeah.
And whether I got all of that from my dad or parts and grew, doesn't matter. It's the same lesson.
Yeah.
And we both had
Same lesson. Yeah. Got so many stories about Dad like that. The one I told at his funeral about he was in the very last stages of life, and I came to visit him. He wasn't doing well, and but he was all excited, and he said, "Oh, they painted the hall this morning," and he just went on, and how about this, the expertise of this painter he had seen, how he did his job. It was just so wonderful. And it was like, this is a guy who has lived an amazing life. And the thing he wanted to gush about was how this painter had done his job so expertly and so effortlessly.
And you had
that was him.
You had mentioned earlier that he's, I don't be a ditch digger. He'd told me, all of us, whatever you want to do in your life, it's your life. Just, he wants us to be the best we can at it so we can get the most out of it. Right. And I don't remember ditch digger, but I mean trash collector. If you want to be a trash collector, just put everything into it and be the best you can at it. Didn't matter what you did. Yeah. When I was in the Army, especially in my early years, had an MP company. Now, the vast majority of my people were military police, but I had admin, I had mechanics, I had chemical, I had supply, and all these other things. And historically, those people are ignored and focus on your area. And no, I got the groups together and the leadership together and the soldiers and said, you MPs out there, you're out doing this job. Is that the job of the company? Yeah, that's the job of the company. Are you the most important stuff we have? Smart ones would be quiet, and the other ones, yeah. And can you do your job without your Jeep or your vehicle? Well, no, but can you do your job if you don't get paid? Can you do your job if you don't have the supplies? These are the people that make you look good and enable you to do your job. And
absolutely,
because not because it's a nice thing to say, because it's true.
It's true.
If there's a job out there we don't need, we get rid of it because we need more of something else.
Yeah, exactly.
So Dad gushing over how well a guy painted, not surprising at all.
Yep.
He did
exactly.
He knew what he was doing. He did a great job at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And when he decided to leave the hospital, finally,
The state hospital?
The state hospital.
He was the number 2 guy at the Traverse City State Hospital. That's what he's talking about, not his illness at the hospital.
Clinical director, and he said, the next person I was going to have to lay off had been a nurse there for 29 and a half years. And he just said,
not doing it.
I am not doing it. I'm not going to be a part of the problem. So, although I'm sure it would have been still very lucrative for him to stay, it didn't. That was important, that you do the right thing. Just as you said, just because it is the right thing.
Yeah.